It's Thursday, 1 week away from the NFL draft. The Green Bay Packers will be picking maybe 29th overall 1 week from tonight. Who are they going with? Well, we've got a special guest tonight, and we've got Tony Pauline here on the Gold Zone. I'm here with Alex Strouf. Let's hit it. Check, is it on? You are not in the wrong spot. I will tell you that right now. This is a special edition of the Gold Zone here on Game On Wisconsin. I'm your host. I'm Jacob Westendorf. I'm live here as I always am in the Game On Wisconsin studios. I am not, however, joined by Jacob Morley. Jacob did not take the age-old saying of track is whack, and he is currently at a track meet. So good for Mr. Morley. I am, however, joined by he of ESPN Madison, Game On Wisconsin, and a million other things that he does, a man of many hats, the great Alex Strouf of the pre-snap and the post-route and various other projects here on Game On Wisconsin. Alex, I said this before, I don't think I've seen you in probably 2 months, so I'm happy to see that you are alive and kicking.
Yeah, I am kicking. I haven't kicked the bucket quite yet. I haven't seen the Game On Wisconsin family since the NFC Championship game loss. It's the last time I appeared on Game On Wisconsin. So it's been like 3 months. Good to see everybody. Dan, welcome in. Good to see you. And yeah, we're going to have some fun today. A week away from the draft, the tension's high, the energy's high. Everything's high, right? I'm not, but everything else is, right? So I'm having a lot of fun. I'm really getting amped up, and we're ramping up. Into debatably the most fun weekend of the NFL. So I'm super jacked, and we got a great guest to chop it up with today.
That we do. We are waiting on Mr. Tony Pauline. He will join us momentarily at some point today. He of I believe I'm pronouncing that right, podcast. You can follow those on Twitter at the respective handles that I threw up there. And I like that you mentioned maybe the most entertaining, I guess is the right word, weekend in the NFL. Because I will say this. Last year, I don't think you're going to find a lot of people that were just like, oh, hell yeah, we just took Jordan Love, but it was entertaining. And I will say, if nothing else, okay, good for Alex. He obviously was one of those people. But
I was amped.
Okay. And you know what? Everybody loves a good story, and that certainly is part of the story. The problem now is that storyline's been beaten into the ground. But if nothing else,
that horse is very dead.
Yes, and beaten and buried and cremated and brought back to life and then killed in all those steps
right.
again.
Yeah, take it behind the shed again. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So we have plenty to go on as far as that goes. But the thing I like about the draft weekend is the optimism that comes with it. And the funny part to me is always, the guys that they always talk themselves into like one or two guys that they'll pick. And then when Green Bay doesn't pick that guy, they're usually a little upset. And then a vast majority of those people talk themselves into, he's, he'll be fine. He'll be good. Rashawn Gary is a great example for that. Yeah. Kyle, welcome to the show. Happy birthday. I also hope you get drafted and get that very nice signing bonus. That is what
I do too. He better be giving us some. That's for sure. But I'll tell you what, Jake, on that same aspect, right? The draft always brings the opinions, it brings the angles, it brings the angry mob, because the Packers aren't going to do what, maybe you expect them to do or want them to do. And on that same aspect, right? Draft grades come out. Draft grades are the dumbest thing in the entire sports media world. I hate nothing more than draft grades because you cannot evaluate somebody's value to a team before they've even put on a freaking jersey. Come on. So already, right before we get into this, let's cool the jets already. We're a week out. Let's cool the jets on everything. The Packers know a lot more than me and you combined now, Jake. So, at the end of the day, I'm going to be happy with the direction they go. I was a lot more I was super pumped about the Jordan Love pick. I think I'm the only person in the state of Wisconsin that was super jacked on that. So we will see how it turns out. We'll see how this year's draft turns out. But I'm really looking forward to see what Green Bay does or doesn't do at pick 29.
And we will get a little bit more information on that as we are joined now by the great Tony Pauline of the Pro Football Network. Tony, first and foremost, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking some time with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Oh, I'm quite certain you will. So before we get too deep into these things, just tell the people a little bit, who you are. Obviously, we know you're with PFN now, but where you've been and all that what got you to this point?
Luck and, more importantly, a lot of hard work, a lot of insanity. While my wife was upstairs watching TV, I was downstairs watching 3 and 4 game films a day to build up the reputation. So listen, it's hard work. It's a lot more goes into it than what people think. It's the ability to, in my opinion anyway, speak off the top of your head about just about any player. Then people come to respect you and they're willing to share information with you. So that's basically how it happened. But it took a while to get there.
Yeah, you mentioned the hard work, Tony, and I'm curious. On a given year, let's just go with the 2021 class. How many players are you actually doing a deep dive on, evaluating, watching film? Is it like an outrageous amount?
More than 800. I mean, my board my board this year is 873 now, and this is a light year. Usually, I have more than 1,100 players who are graded and ranked. But this year, because you've got so many seniors going back for a second senior year, a la the NCAA rule, you really have a bit of a dearth of talent. I mean, I think last year at Pro Football Network, we probably had close to just under 800 scouting reports. And I scout those guys myself. I watch film. Now, what happens is when you're watching Ohio State or you're watching Alabama, you've got to watch 8 or 9 games that they played during the season, as opposed to if you're watching Idaho State or Wisconsin Whitewater for, Quinn Miners, you can watch a few games. You can watch them at the Senior Bowl. It doesn't take as long. With the lesser players, the players at the bottom, all you need is a couple games, and then you start to see tendencies, and you take it from there.
Do you ever sleep?
Yeah.
Not well. That's for sure. Especially this time of year. Not well.
My gosh. I mean, 1,100 players. You said 800 players. Something I heard, and I don't remember the exact platform that I saw this on. It might have been PFN, but you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Is you were talking about how NFL teams only have, their board is like 110, 120 guys that they like. And these are like guys, that they're like, these are the guys they're going to draft. So just kind of take us through what that looks like to where, like, for example, the Packers, have they ranked Trevor Lawrence? Like, are they ready for something like that in case the bong mask video comes out the day of the draft? Or is that, do they just are like, okay, he's definitely not going to be there. We don't even really have to bother.
Right.
I tend to doubt that they have Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson graded on their board. Usually what happens is, a team will have 125 players drafted, listed on their board, graded on their board from start to bottom. Guys that they think guys that they like, guys that they grade, players that they think that they can either draft or later sign as free agents. And what happens is as other teams start to draft the players or select the players that are on their board, their names come off the board. And then when that team or the Green Bay Packers are called to the clock late in round 1, they'll look at the board and they'll start to discuss the guys at the top of the board and who they are going to draft from the guys that are at the top of the board. And then whatever is left over, those are the guys they go and sign as priority free agents. Drafting off the board usually means that, they'll be called to the clock and there could be a higher rated player there that they didn't expect, that they didn't grade, and they'll talk about it, or basically drafting a player that's not on their board. One thing I said yesterday, if you watched the show with Trey Wingo, is what teams are doing this year is they're actually expanding their boards from 125 players to 175 players. And the reason is because there's so few players this year compared to previous years. There's a concern that teams will have the same names on the board more so than usual. Not necessarily graded, the same manner, but the same names, from team to team to team compared to previous years. And when you get into those later rounds, there's a concern that a lot of those guys may be off the board. You may be running out of names. So they're actually expanding the board due to the shallowing of talent in this year's draft, which kind of seems like a contradiction. But if you get the concept, you understand why.
Mm-hmm. Totally. The great Tony Pauline, our guest here on the Gold Zone on Game On Wisconsin. Alex Strouf, Jacob Westendorf with you. Tony, I live about 90 miles west of Green Bay, and I can still hear all the pissed off fans yelling about how they didn't draft a wide receiver last year. Great class last year. Really good class again this year. What are some comparisons between the two classes? How do you evaluate this year's wide receiver class as a whole versus last year's?
I think this year at the top is much, much better. I mean, whether it be Jamar Chase, whether it be Devonta Smith, whether it be Jalen Waddle, any of those guys probably would have been the first receiver taken in last year's draft ahead of Henry Ruggs.
Yeah.
So I think it's much, much better at the top. I think in the middle portion, it's not as strong. I don't think you're going to find a situation like you did last year where Denzel Mims, a guy that was highly rated, potential late first round pick, falls into the late second round, and then it goes on to have a good year for the New York Jets when he was healthy. So I think it's much better at the top. I think in the middle, it's probably a little bit weaker, but I also think there's outstanding depth like last year.
We got a good question here in the chat because this was Devonta Smith obviously had weighed in, and they said, do you think he slips at all due to that weigh-in number?
Maybe. I think what it does is when he's that small, he's not a fit for every scheme. So, as I said yesterday, again last night in the show with Trey Wingo, this didn't come to the Miami Dolphins, but there are people who are familiar with the Dolphins who are telling me they have a tough time seeing Chris Greer draft a receiver that's under 170 pounds. And then what happens is the questions come in. How good is he going to be against press coverage at the next level? Is he going to be able to go up and come away with the contested grab on a consistent basis like he did at Alabama the past 2 years? So I think it's a situation where if he fits your scheme, you're going to draft him. If he doesn't fit your scheme or you kind of have questions that, you're going to drop down, as opposed to, say, a Jamar Chase, who in my opinion fits every scheme.
And on that note, the other question with, the weigh-in numbers, obviously you mentioned Jamar Chase, somebody who opted out. One of the big questions that I've just had since this whole thing started is how are teams going to view opt-outs, and will they view them differently? Jamar Chase opts out at the beginning of the season. Right. Terrace Marshall Jr., his teammate, opts out before they play Alabama. Is that something that a team's going to see differently? How do you think that the opt-outs are going to affect certain – Chase is going to be a top 10 pick. Like we pretty much know that. That's pretty well set in stone, I think, at this point. But some of the other guys that you get a little further down, the Micah Parsonses of the world, Rashad Bateman obviously opted in, then opted out, then opted in and opted out and all that sort of stuff. Terrace Marshall's another example. How do you think that affects the guys that aren't, that top 5, top 10 kind of talent?
Well, it's going to go from team to team to team. Again, I hate to be redundant. A couple of weeks ago during the podcast with Trey Wingo, I said that I was told that the Miami Dolphins would prefer not to, or there were some people in the front office who did not want to take a player that opted out with that early pick, with that third selection. Sure enough, 3 days later, they made that trade from 3 to 12 back up to 6, and now there's talk that they may move down a few additional slots. So I do think that there is an opinion from some in the league that they would prefer not to take a guy who opts out. Now, every story is completely different. I mean, there's a cornerback from Central Florida by the name of Tay Gowan, who's a solid player. He chose to opt out because he got COVID over the summer, gave it to his mother. His mother ended up being hospitalized because of her reaction to COVID. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to shut it down. And there were other guys who, Gregory Rousseau, Miami of Florida, defensive end, people were projecting him as a top 12 pick at points in time. I never agree with that. He said he decided to opt out of the season, prepare for the NFL draft. Then he goes and turns in a crappy pro day. So it's not a broad brush thing. It's gonna be different from team to team to team, and even within the war rooms of those teams, there's going to be a dissenting opinions.
Sticking with wide receivers, Tony, you wrote a nice piece for Pro Football Network earlier this week about Western Michigan's Dwayne Eskridge. He's on the rise. You said the Packers might be a good fit for him. Would love for you to dive into that a little bit.
Well, I said the Packers actually like him. And one of the teams late in round 2, I named 2 or 3 teams that the Chicago Bears are one of them that really like him because, he's an athletic guy. He's a speedy guy. He's had 2 good seasons. He's very athletic. practiced for 2 days at the Senior Bowl, and he was unstoppable. I mean, he was getting separation through his speed and through his route running. And, whenever Eskridge was doing one-on-ones or in the scrimmage, he was consistently 2 and 3 yards behind the defensive back who had to play catch-up. And he caught everything. I got to interview him, and he's really an interesting guy. He played cornerback early at Western Michigan, and he's like, look, if a team wants to put me at cornerback, I've been saying during these Zoom meetings, I can play cornerback for you if you want to. He's obviously also has return ability. He ran a 4.35 during his pro day. When I asked him about it, because he was a high school sprint champion, he told me that he thought he was going to run at least a tenth faster. He lost speed at the start because he popped up too high out of the start, out of his 3-point stance. So, I mean, listen, there's only a few guys that have that true breakaway speed in this draft. Rondell Moore of Purdue, one of my favorites, Elijah Moore of Mississippi, and then Dwayne Eskridge. Eskridge has got decent size. I mean, he's not the tallest guy, but 5'9 and a half, 188 pounds, and runs and plays in the low 4.3s. A team like Green Bay who really needs a field stretcher, someone who can take it vertical, I think he's very appealing to them.
Yeah, you got to be careful, Tony. Packers fans are going to go wild. You just said wide receiver, cornerback, and returner for Eskridge. I think people are going to their minds are going to blow up.
Fill all the deeds with one pick.
Right. Why not take him at 29 then if that's the case? On that note, there was a question. You mentioned Rondell Moore. You mentioned Elijah Moore. The question here from JJ overseas, actually, he's across the pond here. Is this the year that they go against the recent tendency? You look at the receiver core. It's Gutekunst even said, I like tall, long athletes, and all of his receivers pretty much look that part. Is this the year they go someone smaller, gadgety type? Eskridge one, he mentions Kadarius Toney and the More and More law firm.
First of all, what was his name from across the pond?
His name's JJ.
JJ, listen, if you see Robert Plant, just tell him I said hi, please.
Heck yeah.
You never know with the Packers. You would think that at some point in time, they have to. Who thought they were going to draft Jordan Love last year? I mean, who thought that they were going to take A.J. Dillon as early as they did? Do I think they'll go against? I think they have to at some point in time because when you draft these guys in the first and second round that are reserves, eventually you're going to have holes on your depth chart and holes on your roster.
That they will. And yeah, it's crazy because last year was the year I don't think there were many mocks at all that didn't have a receiver penciled in where Green Bay was picking or moving up to get a guy. And then obviously they went Jordan Love. Let's transition to the other side of the ball. Yeah. The cornerback class is, I don't know if I would call it very deep, but there's some nice players there, especially in the first round. And just looking at that's where, if Green Bay doesn't go on the offensive side of the ball, if they do take defense, it feels like cornerback would be the position for them to target. Who are some guys you think that could fit in that late end of that first round or somebody to move up for?
Hold on, Jake. You missed a very good opportunity. You should have phrased it like this. What's the name of a corner that could take the Packers on the stairway to heaven? Thank you.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
Thank you.
There you go. As opposed to being trampled underfoot, right?
There we go.
Yes.
Yes. Love the Led Zepp references. Good stuff.
If Caleb Farley of Virginia Tech falls, obviously you're going to have to talk about him. Again, here's a guy who at one point in time was considered a top 10 pick, not by myself because I never thought he was that consistent of a shutdown corner at Virginia Tech. But he's long, he's athletic, he's flashed ability since his freshman season at Virginia Tech. Opted out this season, now has the back issue. The problem with the back issues are when you have one, it usually means you're going to have another one. So I think that's a guy they're going to have to look at. Greg Newsome of Northwestern fits into the potentially late part of round one. I always thought he's more second round talent, but he's big, he's physical, he's smart, and he ran excessively fast during Northwestern's pro day. Whether he ran 40 yards or 38 yards remains to be determined. He doesn't play to that speed on the field. I'll tell you that much, although I do like Newsome. A sleeper could be Kelvin Joseph of Kentucky, a guy I've talked about a couple times. Just a hair under 6 foot tall, 197 pounds, terrific cover guy, LSU transfer. He's got to do a better job making plays with his back to the ball because Kentucky basically used him facing the action in a playmaking mold. Answered questions about his speed during pro day. There were concerns about, does he have the deep speed? A lot of people may be familiar with that film clip where Kyle Pitts is running away from him. runs in the mid to low 4.3s during pro day. So he's a guy with a high upside. So I think that it's a situation with cornerbacks where it could be the Packers take somebody that is more early round 2 talent rather than late first round talent, unless Caleb Farley's there. But if Caleb Farley's there, that means a lot of teams passed on him, and there's some major red flags about him.
Yeah, super good analysis there. Sticking with corners, obviously, what goes into the evaluation, you see the slot corners, you see the boundary corners. There's some guys that can do both really well. You mentioned maybe second round, maybe some mid rounds. Is there some mid round talent that can do both slot and boundary or excel in both of those that might stick out to you, might pop out to you guys? You might have I hate the term draft crush, but let's use it. Maybe a mid round draft crush that really excels there.
Well, let's look at late second round. If Asante Samuel of Florida State's there, I think that's someone who absolutely fits the mold. I like Shakur Brown of Michigan State. Had a great year, terrific ball skills. But again, 5'9.5", 185 pounds. Only ran the 4.6s in his pro day, though he plays much, much faster. Two guys, Kerry Vincent Jr. of LSU and Elijah Griffin of USC. Again, not 6 foot tall, a little bit on the small side, but they're fast. They've got tremendous ball skills, and they do what a lot of college cornerbacks don't do well. They make plays with their back to the ball. And what I say with that is, the DeAndre Bakers of the world, those guys, when they came into the league, they're either they're good facing the action, or they're face guarding their opponents, and they're making plays when the ball gets to the opponent's hand, into the opponent's hands, or the receiver's hands, I should say. You can do that on Saturday. It's a tough thing to do on Sunday. You're going to get burned a lot. Those guys really don't. They can make plays with their back to the ball.
Tony Pauline of the Pro Football Network, like we mentioned on the corner side of things. I'm happy you mentioned Asante Samuel Jr. That's somebody Green Bay's met with twice, actually. So that could mean they're looking to potentially go out of that threshold. You mentioned some smaller guys there. Before we let you go here, let's get the offensive tackle position is part of the class. Brian Gutekunst said his 2 deepest positions in this draft class were the cornerback group and the offensive tackle group. So who are some tackles that you think that Green Bay could potentially target? And they've had that sweet stroke in the 4th round of the draft. So maybe not even just early guys, but a couple, day 2, early day 3 types too.
Yeah, second round, maybe Sam Cosmi of Texas if he's there. He fits the mold. Brady Christensen out of BYU, who a lot of people don't talk about because Zach Wilson's sucking all the air out of the room at BYU, and he's a terrific talent. Dan Moore Jr. out of Texas A&M, very athletic guy, long guy, been a little bit inconsistent in his game, but has an upside. Jalen Moore of Western Michigan, 5th rounder, can play tackle or guard. Here's a guy to remember, Josh Ball out of Marshall, a guy who on the field is day 2 talent, had some off the field issues at Florida State, which has knocked him down boards or taken him off boards altogether. But he's a very athletic guy. He did a great job as a consistent left tackle at Marshall this year. Anything outside the 3rd round is great value for Josh Ball. I think he's going to fall outside the 3rd round. The off-the-field issues seem to be a one-off type incident with an ex-girlfriend, he said, she said sort of thing. So if he falls late into the draft, which I think is a possibility, you swipe him up. If everything checks out and he's on a straight and narrow, which he seems to be, you could have yourself a starting tackle in the NFL, which is gold.
Tony, you're an absolute legend. Do you have one more, Jake?
No, go ahead.
Well, you're an absolute legend. Appreciate the time, man. I know how busy you are, especially this and next week. Just real quick before you let you go, you do a ton of stuff. Your work's all over the place. Let our wonderful audience know where we can find the great Tony Pauline.
I usually tell my wife, just Google my name and you'll find out where I'm at. So
there's some truth to that.
I mean, we did the podcast, I believe, Podcast Network with Chris Tripodi. We had a ton of interviews with Senior Bowl players, including Dwayne Eskridge. So if you want to find out more about Dwayne Eskridge, you can hear him for a good 20 minutes. Obviously, Pro Football Network, you can go there. You can download our free draft guide, 370 some odd players with 300 scouting reports. The rest of the scouting reports will be filled in at the site. I'm going to do the show Wednesday nights with Trey Wingo. That's a lot of fun. Drop a lot of information there, a lot of rankings. And during the season, we got fantasy football. We have a little betting information for people who like to make a wager here and there. And, mock drafts, more mock drafts than you can imagine.
Incredible. Thank you for stopping by. That Wednesday show, like you mentioned, with Trey Wingo, one of the best additions, you guys. I was so bummed when he left ESPN, but he's landed very well at Pro Football Network. Tony, appreciate your time, appreciate your work, and look forward to chatting again potentially someday.
Go take a nap or maybe watch some film, huh?
Or watch film while I listen to Zeppelin, although I watch most of it.
Oh, I like that option.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it, man.
He was Tony Pauline, obviously, of the Pro Football Network. Alex, I've got like goosebumps just kind of running through me here a little bit. I'm ready to run through a wall for this guy, man. That was absolutely incredible just going through. And it's crazy to me how he's looking right at us the entire time and just spouting these dudes off like it's nothing. And
I don't know if you can tell, but I was doing some Google like while he was spewing out answers. That guy's absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
How does his head not hurt?
No, I don't know. He's got 1,100 players, like you mentioned, that he's graded, and he's just throwing these guys all out there. And there wasn't like, oh man, we went through that and he just missed this dude's name, and this one was obvious. It was like,
right.
I
just trust anything he says. It became the gospel to me. That was fantastic.
I'm just going to start texting him anytime because I totally haven't.
You're going to get blocked real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Tony, what do you think of this dude real quick? But okay, so let's digest a little bit. We've got a little bit of time here before, we've got some stuff going on tonight of Game On Wisconsin, and I do want to let you guys know that. Be sure. That's next week, actually. But we've got some stuff going on. We've got the open bar later tonight with the boys and girls from Open Book and the boys from Lombardi's Bar opening up, and they're going to have a little bit of fun together tonight. But before we get to that, we definitely have some time here to just kind of digest what he said. We could talk a little bit before, signing off here. But what do you think was, the most interesting part, I guess, of what Tony had to say tonight?
Well, I know the big two things that you and I wanted to hit on. I'm glad you got to the tackles because obviously the Packers need depth there. So, and they will draft some offensive linemen. That's just how Brian Gutekunst has operated the last few drafts we've seen from him, or the only few drafts, I guess, we've seen from him. But quarterbacks and wide receivers. I mean, and it seems like that was the case last year too. The big needs of the Packers, the guys that they want to hit. I was ready to run through a brick wall when he mentioned Asante Samuel Jr. because that's a guy I think all of Packers Nation has had a crush on for, it feels like, since the season ended. Seriously, that was one of the first guys. Not that I watch a ton of film. I'm not crazy like Tony, but that was one of the first guys I did a deep dive in.
Well, I'm going to tell you this. If the standard is Tony Pauline, then we all fall short if that's where it's going to be in terms of film.
If that's the standard, then I don't belong here.
Exactly.
Right. So, but no, seriously, that was important. I love that he dove into the Dwayne Eskridge thing a little bit. I haven't listened to that podcast, so I'm going to have to do that once we jump off here because that is a name that I've been seeing pop up a little bit more, partially because of Tony, but partially not because of, but great analysis on wide receivers and quarterbacks because that's what we all want. It's draft season. It's the Packers. And we know those are the two positions that everybody is clamoring for them to pick up on. So good stuff from him there.
Yeah, I was interested in the offensive tackle stuff. I was happy we were able to get to that as well, just because that's a position that Green Bay, they could target as soon as 29. I also think that they could opt to, wait and grab a couple guys a little bit later and feel like if they could find, Caleb Farley potentially dropping. I thought that was interesting just because he could have it could be the Miles Jack thing where he drops all the way down. It could be the complete opposite of that, where some team says, nope, we don't care. And they pick him in the top 10 or the top 15. And he's not even a dream for the Packers. It's always interesting to me to see how we always have, we feel like we know how the draft is going to play out. And there is some truth to that. We know, the first two picks, we've known those for a month. We've known Trevor Lawrence since he stepped on college campus at Clemson that he was going to be the number one overall pick. We knew that. But Zach Wilson at number 2, we've known that for a while. And then number 3, it feels like that's going to be Mac Jones. And the draft really starts at number 4. And
Which I don't get that at all. Mac Jones at number 3 makes absolutely no sense to me. I did a good 10-minute rant about this the other day on radio. I don't get how Mac Jones is the number 3 quarterback in this draft, but that's beside the point, I guess. Sorry.
I've said this. I think Kyle Shanahan is either going to prove that he is so much smarter than us, which, I mean, he is, regardless of how this plays out, but he's so much smarter than everyone, or his arrogance is going to get in his way and get him fired. It's one of those two things. With the Mac Jones selection, if that is what it is. But the draft starts at 4 with, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Kyle Pitts. What direction do the Falcons go? Do they trade? Does that become a quarterback? Do they just stick and pick and go with someone like Kyle Pitts, Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, or do they go an offensive tackle, which I don't think would necessarily be a bad idea either. But, going through all of that stuff, it was just interesting to hear, once we get to the end of the draft, everybody's like, oh man, is Green Bay really going to have a chance to pick this cornerback or this wide receiver? And the answer to that question more often than not is, yeah, maybe, because we just have no idea how last year we thought the receivers were going to start coming off the board in the top 7 to 10. And it took a while for CeeDee Lamb was picked 17th.
Yeah.
That was crazy. I mean, Henry Ruggs went a little sooner, but
the dominoes didn't start falling till later than we expected. But that typically always seems how it works with the draft, Jacob, right? I mean, we all do these mock drafts. We think, yeah, we're going to get 29 and a 32 in the first round, right? Hell no, you're not. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. There's always a bombshell thrown in, right? We know bona fide, done deal, Trevor Lawrence number 1. I'm not even ready to say Zach Wilson's a bona fide done deal at number 2. I think it's the most obvious choice. I think it makes a lot of sense. But I don't know. I don't know what the Jets are going to throw at us at number 2. I think this draft's going to be even more fun than last year, more curveballs than last year, more trades than last year. I think it's going to get goofy in the first round especially, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Now, let me ask this. I don't want to switch gears too much, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed because we know that Brian Gutekunst likes to do it. Should we expect the Packers to move either up or down? Yeah, I think so too. I don't think they pick at 29.
No, and I think he moves up. And I know a lot of people are saying that they're on the side of trade down, but if there's –
they have the capital to move up. They have the capital to move up.
They do, and if you want an impact player, Gutekunst has traded up in every one of the first rounds of his draft. He traded up for Jair Alexander after trading down. Obviously, there's a little bit of caveat there, but then traded up to get Darnell Savage, and then last year, obviously, famously trades up to get Jordan Love. This year, I think if some of those corners start flying off the board, and here's a little nugget I have. I've been told they're not gonna miss on their guy again. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means an offensive tackle. I don't know if that means a corner. I don't know if that means they liked something last year that they didn't get, but I've been told they're not going to miss on that guy again. So that means, what does that mean? Does that mean Greg Newsome? Does that mean Rashad Bateman? That's the receiver. If Green Bay is going to go a first-round receiver, that's the one I think they would pick if they went the round 1 route for the receivers. Does that mean Asante Samuel, which that could get interesting? And maybe that means something for day 2. Something else that I think could be interesting is if they do stick and pick at 29, which I don't expect, is moving up on day 2 to try and get back into that top 45, top 50.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think if Alex Leatherwood out of, I believe that's an Alabama tackle.
Alabama,
right? If he's available day 2 early, I wouldn't be shocked if they moved because I think that's a guy, and rightfully so, a lot of people are high on. Obviously, tackle is a position of need. The depth on the offensive line is not what it was a year ago, and that's something we praised so much during that NFC Championship run last year. Not the case this year. So I think that's something that I'm expecting in the first 2 or 3 rounds. A tackle or maybe somebody that a float or somebody that they can move around. But let me ask you this before we go, and this is we're going to play a little game, a little power rankings. All right, I want the top 3 positions that you want to see the Packers go after just in the first round, just round 1. We'll go 3 to 1. You go first.
3 to 1. So wide receiver, offensive tackle, cornerback. I think that, let me change cornerback to defensive back. Cause if they take Trevon Merrick or Javon Holland or, one of those safeties that allows them to play around, I'm okay with that. Some of that might change. Like for example, if Tevin Jenkins and Alex Leatherwood are gone, and you're asking me like, who do I pick between Rashad Bateman and Samuel Cosmi? My answer is Rashad Bateman, and partially because I don't care that much for Cosmi as a player. I shouldn't say it like that, but I'm not as high on him as some other people are, and I'm very high on Rashad Bateman. That's also something that's that way. But defensive back to me, if they are going to trade up, in my opinion, Caleb Farley, Greg Newsome, Trevon Merrick. If Patrick Surtain or JC Horn starts to fall, if you're going to do the YOLO Marcus Davenport kind of trade, which the Saints did years ago, those are the guys I think it should be for. And you know what? The next day, everybody will be pissing and moaning that they didn't pick everybody on TV, I should say, will be pissing and moaning that they didn't pick a receiver. But honestly, I think Peter Bukowski says this all the time, friend of the network here, that the path to the rookie that could make the most impact and make this Packers team the best it can be in 2021 is a cornerback. And I certainly think that's true.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment 100%. Yeah, I would probably, I think I'm the same with you, right? I think I'd go OT number 3, wide receiver number 2, quarterback number 1. They need to draft another quarterback.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can never have too many of those, right?
Right, exactly, right? We got rid of Tim Boyle, might as well bring in another one. But yeah, a cornerback at number 1 or defensive back really at number 1. And Peter's right when he says that, right? I mean, you look at immediate impact. And we talked a lot about this, I think, especially during the late season and into the playoff runs, a lot in the post route as we always go back and analyze how the draft works out. Your impact, especially in year 1, is rarely like superb. Like you rarely get huge contributions from your rookies in year 1. It just doesn't really happen that much. But defensive back is where you can look and say, yeah, there's actually, there's a chance for significant improvement there. And I know a lot of people weren't super happy with Kevin King being re-signed. So this is an opportunity to say, okay, we understand that, but that's just a depth move, right? We're going to bring in a guy in the first round that's going to immediately contribute, similar to how Jair did a few years back. So
yeah, Alexander starts. So I'll jump in on that. The one point I keep making is one rookie since Gutekunst became the general manager has been a preferred day 1 starter, and that is Darnell Savage. Jair Alexander wasn't a day 1 starter, eventually was. They figured out that he was better than Devon House pretty quickly, but the Packers usually have a veteran in front of even Elton Jenkins. Jenkins became a starter after Lane Taylor got hurt. Yeah. So the Packers, I mean, do I think this could be a year where it's a little different? Yes, I do, because they could draft a corner in the first round. They could draft a gadget receiver and have him, if they draft Rondell Moore, for example, he plays the Tyler Ervin role. And then we all just sit there with giddy excitement every time he touches the ball, because with all due respect to Swerve and Ervin, he did a lot of good things in Green Bay. Rondell Moore is Tyler Ervin on massive amounts of juice. I'm not suggesting he's got PEDs in his system.
No, right.
He's much bigger. He's much stronger. He's
got
the
juice, right? He's got the juice. He brings the juice. I get it. But yeah, to go back to Tyler Ervin, super replaceable. Exciting, electric player, but didn't really do all that much during his stint in Green Bay. I mean, it was a lot more hype than there was substance.
It was because he could catch the ball on a punt and run forward. Like that was really the gist of it.
Exactly. And obviously they were testing out the things in training camp. I don't know. Well, we're not credentialed. We're allowed to talk about this. He was getting tested out at the slot. He was, they were moving. He was a gadget player, right? I mean, they were using him wherever they could. And you look for that versatility. Brian Gutekunst clamors over versatility. That is like his favorite word in the dictionary. Versatility, baby. That's what he looks for at every single position. So that's a great call. I'm always puzzled because this isn't going to go the way anybody expects. They're probably not even going to touch one of the position groups we just mentioned, either offensive tackle, wide receiver, or defensive back. They're not going to touch one of those groups. It's just how it always goes in the draft. And I'm intrigued to see which one of them they miss out on this year. I don't think it'll be wide receiver, though. I think they will. Even if it's a 6th-round guy and that's the only one they grab, I think they will draft a wide receiver this year.
I do, and I tend to think they'll grab one before the end of day 2. You start talking about trading back up into the 2nd round. Does that mean for Asante Samuel? Does that mean for Diami Brown? Does that mean in the 3rd round for like Amari Rodgers or somebody like that? There are players that I think fit in what Green Bay needs and what they want to do here for the next couple. Eskridge could even be another one like Tony talked about. But I just look forward to seeing what they do and watching the plan kind of, because the draft is really the last big thing that happens in the offseason for team improvement until the beginning of the year. You have some weird years where like Khalil Mack gets traded to Chicago right before the season starts, but that's pretty rare. This is it, and Green Bay has an opportunity it's a roster that's good enough to win the Super Bowl. They were good enough to be in the Super Bowl last year had they not shot themselves in the foot. We don't need to rehash that, but a couple complementary pieces added to the team. And I think if you get one rookie, like I mentioned, if you get a corner to make an impact, not even day 1, but just early, then I think you're in really good shape. So
I agree with you. Real quick. I agree with you. There wasn't a big splash in free agency. You don't necessarily typically expect that out of the Packers anyway. But yeah, you're right. This roster still is good enough. A, if they remain healthy, and B, if they, don't get seen through just like they didn't last year. I mean, that was a 13-3 team, number 1 seed in the NFC. Clearly a good enough team to make it to the big dance, the big game, rather. I'm still in March Madness mode, apparently, but
Right.
they make it to the big game. So it's just right. You know, you don't expect huge contributions from this rookie class, but there still is going to be a player in there that could really help them take that next step. Because especially in the defensive back side of things, you don't think Kevin King's the answer. Wide receiver wise, you probably don't think who are they getting back? Funchess. He's probably not going to, change everything for that Packers
I think
offense.
he gets cut. I
think he does too. I think he does too. And so, like, you start piecing this together. What's different from last year versus this year? Your defining moment begins in a week.
Right. Yeah. And the answer to that question, by the way, it doesn't have to be a whole hell of a lot. Like,
no,
the team was very, very good. So that's the other part. One quick question before we wrap. I do think the answer to this question, does that mean they, for a change, try and get the immediate impact guy? I do think the answer to that question.
How do you define that though? How do you define
that?
Well,
do they play, like AJ Dillon was a third stringer and Jordan Love, obviously famously inactive for the entire season. Right. Rashawn Gary, for example, was the fourth preferred, do they find somebody who is their cornerback 3, like slot corner by the end of the season? Find someone who starts eventually over Kevin King. That's a good question. Or, my other thing is if they pick an offensive tackle and Bakhtiari's not ready, I bet he starts on day one. So that's where we're going to leave that. Alex, we're going to have to do this again. That was a lot of fun. You can find him on Twitter at Alex_Strouf. You can find me. I am at Jacob Westendorf, and I am all over the place. And coming up tonight, like I mentioned, we have the open bar. The boys and girl from Open Book joining Lombardi's Bar, and Alex is drinking.
I might have to pop in. Yeah.
It is, in fact, 5 o'clock somewhere. So I imagine if you wanted to join in, they would be happy to do that. Next week, 1 week from today, live draft at Lombardi's Bar. So Dan Kotnick, Jimmy Christensen, and Todd Varney will be hosting with a variety of guests talking about how the draft as it goes. It's going to start 1 hour after the draft starts on your television because the Packers don't pick to the end. One of the downsides of being a team that's really good.
What if they trade up in the first hour?
What? If they trade up in the first hour, then they will be live minutes after that happens. Okay. I can tell you that much, but I will put that under unlikely.
That's me putting on the program director hat. I'm trying to figure this out here.
That's right. And then Friday, you'll have the live draft show with me, and that will start. The time is to be determined because if Green Bay trades out of the first round, we'll have to start early, but we look forward to doing that with all of you guys. It's been fun doing this all off season long. We really enjoy doing all this draft coverage and everything for you. We're looking forward to it. He's Alex Strouf. I never get that right. He's Alex Strouf. I'm Jacob Westendorf. Thanks for guys joining, and we will see you next time.
Adios.